Good evening, I'm Dick Cavett. Should she live as long as Methuselah, she will probably still be called the Westinghouse refrigerator lady. She's been credited with more than that, though, including inventing and perfecting a movement called point and stroke that many a game show hostess has emulated. More recently, she's worked in her designer suits and sneakers, reporting consumer news for WNBC in New York. Her reports also appear here on CNBC. So you know now, perhaps my guest today is the incomparable Betty Furness, a reporter who goes to great lengths to get to the root of a story, to peel the onion, as she phrases it. And we'll talk about her efforts to defend and protect you and me, the consumer, in just a moment. Today, we know the word consumer so well that it seems like we've always known it, but some of us can remember a time when you only ran across it in books about animals who were consumers of herbs or whatever. Now that we know we are consumers, are we smarter as consumers noticeably?
You know, Dick, when I went to work at the White House, which is about 22 years ago, people really did not think of themselves as consumers, but they sure do now. And they have gotten so smart. They really have, they've just learned so much about their rights in the marketplace. I used to, when I first started at NBC, we used to ask for complaints. That's how I got on the air, was I'd say something has happened to Mrs. Smith, and we would resolve it and put the answer on the air and all of that. After a while, we wouldn't get, well, we stopped it. But we couldn't get those kind of complaints because people learned so quickly where to go and what to do and how to get the wrongs righted in the most part. Now,
does this mean that corporations and businesses are more responsive, or do you still have to hammer their head against the wall?
Well, they say they are. They take great pride in being responsive. They all have consumer representatives on the staff. But I find that most of those consumer representatives are not representing the consumer to the corporation, but are representing the corporation to the consumer. So sometimes you can get through. Some of them honestly try to resolve problems, and others just have a lot of expensive window dressing, and they're not serious, but they do know it's smart to say, we care about you, we really do.
So the basic instinct is still to get away with it if they can, if there isn't enough complaint, if people don't howl, if they don't become squeaky hinges.
Well, I think they try to stay one step ahead of the complainers. But I do believe that enough complaints can make a difference. I have a very cute show and tell here. May I show and tell?
Sure, do both.
I heard about, this is an old story, about 10 years ago, a teacher called and said that her class, 7th grade class in school, had been eating McDonald's cherry pies, and they didn't think that there were as many cherries in the pie as seemed to be illustrated on the package. This is a genuine McDonald's package. So the kids went out and they bought a mess of cherry pies, and they pulled them apart and they counted the number of cherries in each pie, and they made charts, all of which have been sent to me. They were simply terrific. You can't see them, read them, but they're just divine. This is the kids' work, all in beautiful pencil. They wrote to McDonald's and said that they thought that there were not enough cherries in the pie, and McDonald's wrote back and said, thanks for writing. But when the teacher told me about this and sent me this, the whole book is done in McDonald's placemats. I put it on air using this material, and of course thought nothing would be done, and I was right, nothing was done. Several months later, somebody showed me in an industry newsletter that McDonald's had increased the number of cherries in their cherry pies.
Hats off.
Now, that started with a bunch of 7th graders and television.
Now, television probably, though, had more power than the 7th graders.
I'm afraid it does. It has a lot of power.
The 7th graders got a nice note from the consumer representative, probably, saying, we'll look into this. What about cases where one person has made a difference? Of course, the one person who's made the biggest difference in our lifetime, I suppose, is Ralph Nader with General Motors.
No possible question about that.
Certainly put all that
He really got cars redesigned, all by his little self, just by screaming and hollering and holding his ground.
Some of us don't have his law degree and his expertise, though.
Or his stick-to-itiveness, either. You know, the great thing to me about Ralph is that it has been more than 20 years that he's been in business now, and industry would so love to tear him down, and nobody has ever been able to lay a glove on him.
Remember when they tried
all that time?
They tried to plant a blonde in his life.
General Motors went to no end of trouble to try to discredit Ralph, and instead they redesigned their cars. There's the person who made the difference.
Yeah, but I still hear people say, I'm going to tell Nader or I'm going to tell Betty Furness, and so you get attention that way.
They do.
Yeah. Are there cases where individuals have really tried and not made a difference?
Oh, sure. Of course. But I still tell people, if something has gone wrong, they should write to the company and say that something has happened. And maybe they won't get a reply on one thing. But if enough people have the same experience, maybe the company will say, geez, maybe we better do something about this.
What happened on the Audi thing? One of the most dramatic things I ever saw began with you and moved to 60 Minutes.
Thank you. Few people are aware of that progression.
Yes, giving credit here. I'm sure they won't mind my crediting you. That was the case where, of all the ghastly ironies, a mother ran over her own son, and I believe the company's position was, well, it was her fault.
Yes, the company said all along that there was no such thing as unintended acceleration. And I talked, as did 60 Minutes, to many people who had had this happen to them, and they're sitting there in the car, and the car goes, achung! You know, terribly fast, ahead or backwards, and it could go either way. And these people, the company always said that the people thought they had the foot on the brake and really had it on the accelerator. Well, when you talk to somebody who's been driving 40, 45 years and looks like a pretty reasonable conservative person, it's hard to believe that happened.
Yeah, it would take work to do that, any more than it would take work to eat with your left hand if you're right-handed.
Exactly. You do things automatically.
Yeah.
Now, it's an endlessly long story, but the government finally came out with a paper after considerable study saying there's no such thing as unintended acceleration. Now, I'm glad I'm not the one who had to explain it to those individuals, especially the mother who ran her own son into the back of the garage wall.
Because he liked to get out and open the garage doors. It's the saddest story.
Yeah, it was very sad. But
they got no satisfaction, none of those people?
No, none. And the company, and I have to say, Dick, this happened with every make of car. Audi seemed to specialize. I mean, there were many, many more accidents in Audis, which makes you wonder. If it happens in every car, then there's some common thing. But why did Audi have a corner on the market, which they seem to have? But there's nothing to be done now. The government says that it doesn't happen, and what can I do?
I still feel powerless at times, even though I know you and things. Suppose, leaving myself out of this, suppose someone with a half-hour show on CNBC had a caloric stove, just to make up a name, and the handles kept breaking off, and the damn thing worked about 1 out of 8 times. And it was felt in the position of the man years ago who put lemons all over his car and drove them around New York until the company bought it back. I actually had a repairman tell me, I mean this mythical person, that perhaps it was haunted. I crossed my heart. Now, when the company, nobody seems too interested in repairing something like that, how effective is the consumer movement if you can't worry them?
Well, if you really try, if you go to the dealer and write to the company and you get no response, the best thing you can do then is to try to go to some government agency. If it happened in New York City, try to go to the Department of Consumer Affairs. There's a good one in New Jersey, and like that. You may not get it righted, Dick. You just may not.
Got to bite the bullet or the broken off handle from the...
Let me tell you, the saddest story in the consumer world is that no one knows how to get a car fixed. If the dealer if the dealer is not willing to fix it and to fulfill his responsibility, people call me with the most dreadful stories. There's nothing I can do. There's nothing anyone can do. You cannot get through to the maker. I can't get through to the maker.
I want to hear more about that when we come back. We'll be right back. Why is the automobile owner the victim and so can't get satisfaction the way he just said?
It's a circuitous problem. You go back to the dealer where you bought the car, and if the dealer can't or won't fix it, The next place you go, you try to get through to Detroit, and they tell you, no, 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 you go to the regional manager. So you call the regional manager, and the regional manager says, gee whiz, it's really the dealer's problem. The dealer then says, I did what I could. They cannot, nobody will take the responsibility, and no one, regional manager, no one will go back to Detroit and say, this is a real problem. They just don't do it. And if you don't get someone along the line with goodwill who is willing to do the thing right, there you are. There's nothing you can do.
Is that what they call the Chinese restaurant phenomenon, that the reason there's so many bad Chinese restaurants in a huge city is that they can count on one-time customers? You'd think a car dealer would want to keep your goodwill, since we've been brainwashed to turn them in every few years.
You want to know something? They don't care, because so many people buy cars. If they lose you, they're going to get somebody right in off the street. I've been told that by people in the business, that they used to want to keep your business because they knew you'd be back in 2 or 3 years. And they don't know that anymore. They don't care. Somebody else will be along.
Would ringing their doorbell at night and running help, and some taking direct action?
Well, it's your idea of fun.
Well, does the government give a damn, really, from what you said earlier in the case of the Audi and other things?
The government is not doing the job that the public thinks it should do. You know, you've got the question of how much responsibility should the government take. The place that I get cross at the government is when they have offices that are supposed to function, and you think, well, there is a Consumer Product Safety Commission. It's there. It's going to take care of me. Have you ever tried to deal with the Consumer Product Safety Commission?
No, sketch out a scenario.
You wonder what business they're in. If a mother calls and says, how many complaints have you had about the ABC toy? My child just got hurt with it. They'll say, well, we can't tell you if we've had any complaints about the ABC toy, but we will be happy to register your complaint. So they take in complaints, and if they get enough that on their scale, they say that may be a problem, they contact the ABC company. But they will not play back to you. Now, I think maybe the worst case that I can think of, and there may be worse, is the all-terrain vehicles. The Consumer Product Safety Commission knew in 1977 that some, I don't know, 700 people had been killed in ATVs. And they said, my, this is a problem, isn't it? 87. By 89, I wrote this down hoping I could tell you, there were 1,245 deaths since between 82 and 89, at which time they got the industry that makes the vehicles to sign a consent decree saying they would not make any more three-wheeled vehicles, and that in the four-wheeled vehicles, lessons would be given to everybody who bought them, and no one under 16 should use them. Now tell me about the lessons that the salesman gives, because more salesmen than not do not give the lessons. And how are they going to police people under 16? They say, now, Daddy, you're buying this. Don't let your child under 16 use this. And the kids under 16 get in the things, and they're still killing themselves.
And it's not a great sales point to say 1,243 people have been killed by this, but buy it anyway because it's a lot of fun.
No,
these are the things with the big tires in some cases.
That's right.
That get rolled over on kids.
And they are very dangerous vehicles. So I don't know. I want there to be a CPSC. I was instrumental in starting it when I was in Washington. But I wish it functioned. The same thing is true with the Food and Drug Administration. They've got this big behemoth of an agency that can't make a decision and can't register a complaint. And we call and say, we have this diet, and we want to know if it's an okay diet. They say, what diet? And we describe it, and they say, well, we never heard of it. You want to send us the material? We send them the material, and then we call 3 weeks later and say, what do you know about this diet? And they say, well, listen, we can't police every diet on the market, and we haven't had any complaints about them, so I don't know.
That's really encouraging. Why can't they tell you when you call up and say the ABC toy hurt the child?
Because it could be destructive to the companies. The only argument I can give for that attitude is, if you wanted to hurt a company, you could get a lot of people to call in and say, I've had a problem with this. It's a dangerous article. And if they then were to say back, well, we've had 150 complaints about a certain can opener, you could damage the company when there actually had been no complaints about the can opener, you know, when it's just mischief. So that, I believe, is their reason.
I see.
But it doesn't help the public. They recalled something a couple of weeks ago. They recalled some baby rattle. that had been on sale from 1983 to 87.
Mm-hmm.
Where were they between 83 and 87?
That's the discouraging thing, is that when you would think that the action followed upon the discovery that it's dangerous, and when you find, as in Brodeur's thing about computer terminals, that for 20 years pregnant women have not been allowed to use them in Czechoslovakia and a couple other countries, but here they have, and they've known. It isn't as if they just made a discovery.
No.
Wow. Well, can we clone you so that there will be more of you around? We have to take another break again. You have some more show and tell items for me?
Yes, I do.
Okay, we'll be back after some messages from very responsible manufacturers and products, we assume. We know. You must be always in pursuit of new cases and things coming in all the time. Where else does your material come from? When you walk about the streets, do people say...
Not much on the street. It actually, most of it ends up on my desk one way or another.
Yeah.
People write in, or, you know, news releases, newspapers.
What else are people likely to be suckers for? Diets seem to be an endless source of money. Diet books are bestsellers automatically, apparently.
Well, everybody hopes that they're going to get, you know, lose the weight in some magic way instead of the old hard way, which is to shut your big mouth.
I've been looking for a book called Diets Don't Work. I haven't found it yet. I've heard, but I don't know how well that
I don't think it would sell.
It might not. Is there anything in your table of wares here that we should be aware of, look out for?
Well, this isn't to look out for, Dick. I did bring one thing that struck us so funny. We do spots sometimes. We don't know if they're any good or not when we put them on, but they amuse us. I did a spot a couple of years ago because I'd heard from somebody who said that the fitted sheet on her bed wouldn't stay tucked under because the mattresses were getting thicker and the fitted sheet wouldn't stay tucked under. And I illustrated it, and I went to the sheet people and said, if the mattresses are thicker, why don't you make the sheets thicker? And they said, because the mattress people won't settle down and decide how thick the mattresses are going to be. I went to the mattress people and said, why don't you tell the sheet people? They said, we have a God-given right to make mattresses as deep as we want. We don't have to tell them. So what happened was, we put the thing on the air. I wasn't out of the studio before I realized I had hit a vein. People said, is that what's the matter with my bed? Well, it turns out that border to border and coast to coast, fitted sheets weren't staying on, but nobody wanted to complain, even to their neighbors.
This is a national problem.
They thought that maybe people would think they'd been bouncing around too much in bed, and it was their fault.
Oh, no one's going to think that.
Well, depending. So people sent me their own solutions about what to do about this. And finally, a cottage industry sprung up. We have here, this looks like garters. You know what it is? It's garters. And this goes under the bed, and you stick the garters on the side of the sheets to hold them down.
That goes over the thing, or
no, underneath the mattress,
and
up it grabs the sheets down like
upside down
that.
Suspenders.
Somebody right here in New Jersey made what they call sheet snug, which is a bolt that you put along the edge of the that cord at the edge of the mattress to hold the sheets down.
Takes up the slack and holds it down.
Started a whole blooming industry. Now, the sheet people said they had fixed this, incidentally. I was on there a couple of times with it.
But they
and the mattress people have outsmarted them. They keep getting thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker, and now people are putting foam rubber on the top of mattresses.
Yeah.
And there ain't going to be no holding the sheets down. So a big industry has sprung up. Here's another version of a suspender to hold the sheets on. And the piece had the biggest impact of anything I've ever done. And we just thought it was kind of silly.
Betty, in the minutes remaining, remind us once again the first couple of steps to take when something goes wrong and you get furious and you paid for it and it doesn't work. You know, like, if I had the president of the company here.
And you start with the retailer. You go where you got the product. And try not to blow your cool, you know, be reasonable and say, here's what's the matter with it. What are you going to do to fix it? They may fix it right away, or send it back to the company or whatever, or give you a new one, whatever. If it fails at the retail level, then you look on the package and find out where the maker lives, and you write to the manufacturer and say, now, about your darn ice tongs or whatever, you know, they are not working. If it is a service or something that you have bought, as I mentioned before, if in your city there is a consumer Protection Agency, go to them if you can't get a response out of anyone and see if they can help
And if you get it to run around there,
you may be flat, back on your own.
Back to ringing doorbells.
It is a wise thing to let your local Better Business Bureau know if you've had a problem with a local
are they any
merchant.
good? I've heard of them all my life, and I've heard people threaten
They
to
used
call
to
the
be
Better Business
ridiculous.
Bureau.
They used to be terrible.
Yeah.
The New York one is outstanding now. It's excellent, and I understand there are some very good ones around the country. They won't do anything to help you necessarily, but they do keep the statistics so that when other people call in, they will say to you, we have had complaints about that company.
Oh, they're not afraid
So
to
you
say.
should then call them before you make an investment. If something sounds marvy and you're not sure, call the Better Business Bureau and say, what about it? And they'll tell you if they've had complaints.
A friend of mine had one of those cars that were killing so many people, and they knew they were going to kill them even before they made them. The Pinto. Was it the Pinto? Yeah. And this is from Russell Mokhiber's wonderful book, Consumer Corporate Crime and Violence. And wrote to the president and said, we can't wait to get back to the other manufacturer, and, and so on. And got response that way. But is there a book that tells you the presidents of companies and their home addresses and phone numbers, as there are in some countries?
There aren't any that have home addresses. There used to be several of those books, and I don't think there are any anymore.
I wonder why.
We have an old one, and you know, the presidents may have gone by now, but it's not a popular item.
If I make a deal with you and you don't have to tell the refrigerator door story, would you tell a story from the days of the 35 movies you made in Hollywood?
Anything. What do you want to know?
Well, leading men who were impossible to work with and thought to be lovely people. We have an entire minute.
I didn't have that kind of experience. I made 35 movies from the time I was 16 to 21, and Dick, I was so thrilled to be there. I was really Alice in Wonderland. I thought it was so great to be there. I knew bad actors when I saw them, but I wasn't any good myself, so I wasn't in a position to complain.
When you know you're on the late show, do you make a point of going to bed early?
No, I'd love to see the movies now. They used to embarrass me terribly. I'd look at them and I didn't know where to look. I thought I was so terrible. Now I realize I'm not responsible for that 18-year-old. You know, she was somebody else, and I'm able to be somewhat amused at them.
We're out of time, Betty. It's gone too fast. Thank you, and it's nice to know you're out there.
Always a pleasure to
Nice to have
see
you
you,
here.
Dick.
Come again. We'll see you next time. Good night.